How's it going, everybody? Today we're going to go over part 2 of our ADM series, starting off with the 3P process. 3P process stands for perceive a hazard with PAVE, process a solution with care, perform the solution as a team. So we're going to go over starting off with PAVE. The P in PAVE stands for pilot. The pilots have a checklist called the I'm Safe checklist that they can use or should use before every flight to ensure their fitness. So the I stands for illness, the M stands for medication. So the FAA has a document that states what meds you can and cannot take and still safely and legally fly. If you're prescribed a medication that isn't on that list, it's wise to contact your AME to make sure that you'll still be fit and legal to fly. The last thing is if you're prescribed a medication that isn't on that list and you're cleared by your AME, it's wise and you'd be exercising great ADM by ensuring that that medication doesn't provide or cause any underlying side effects or lasting side effects. The S is going to stand for stress. So there's chronic and acute. Chronic would be long-term. Acute is short-term, such as check ride stress. Alcohol, stated in the FAR AIM 9117, 8 hours bottle to throttle, blood alcohol content no more than 0.04%, and no hangover or lasting effects. The next is fatigue. Now there's physical and mental. So if you're flying in a really hot environment, after you come back from your flight, you might be physically fatigued. Now, you'd be flying on a cool night, shooting a bunch of instrument approaches, and you come back and you might be mentally fatigued. So it's good to keep track on your physical and mental well-being before entering that aircraft. The last one is going to be emotion. Some people also like to add eating. So you just want to make sure that emotionally you're fit to fly so that your judgment isn't obscured in the aircraft. You also want to make sure that you're drinking enough water, staying hydrated, eating, maintaining a healthy diet, so that way you'll be physically and mentally fit to handle an aircraft. The A is going to stand for aircraft. With this, there's documents, inspections, and equipment. Some people like to use the acronym DIE. Starting off with documents, we have Sparrow. You can also use Arrow. I described Arrow in the in-op equipment video. But the S stands for supplemental. So any additional documents that may be required to have on board in the aircraft. If you have a glass cockpit, such as like a G1000 system, you would need that G1000 manual. So that would be considered a supplemental document. The next is going to be placards. A few placards can include the one for your flaps. Another one can be on your wings, noting what fuel grade that plane takes. If you want to find a list of all the placards, you can find it in section 2 of your POH. The next is going to be airworthiness certificate, just stating that the aircraft is airworthy, making sure that you're up to date with all documents, inspections, equipments, things of that sort. Registration, this is going to last 7 years. The next one is kind of additional, but is mandatory if you're flying outside of the country, so that's going to be your radio station license. I want to note the plane and the pilot need a radio station license or permit each. The next is going to be your operation handbook, so your POH. You need that on board. And lastly is your weight and balance. Not the weight and balance you do before your flight, but the official weight and balance that was issued by the manufacturer when the aircraft rode off the line. Next one's going to be inspections. So we have our ADs. Make sure that all our ADs are complied with. Our annual. So our annual needs to be done every 12 calendar months, and that needs to be signed off by an inspection authorized mechanic. VOR needs to be done every 30 days. And that's to keep the plane IFR current. You need your 100-hour if the plane is for hire, such as flight instruction or chartering. You need and AMP can sign off on this, airframe power plant. They don't need to have their IA attached. Altimeter, pitot tube, and static port needs to be signed off by an inspection authorized mechanic every 24 calendar months. I believe this is also IFR, but you'd be exercising great ADM by doing it even if you are VFR. The next is going to be a transponder. This also needs to be signed off by an IA mechanic every 24 calendar months. And then lastly, we have your ELT. This needs to be inspected every 12 calendar months. So with the annual, or it's been on for 1 cumulative hour, or it's reached its half-life or 50% battery life. Great mnemonic is 121.5 or the guard emergency frequency. And then we have equipment. So we have rackets and cart. This one we're going to use rackets, so that's going to be regulations 91205. That'll be your 8 tomato flames, flaps, and grab card if you're IFR. ADs, make sure that there's no ADs that are requiring specific equipment to be operating or onboard the aircraft. Our kinds of equipment list, section 2 of the POH, comprehensive equipment list, section 6 of the POH. Type certificate data sheet, supplemental type certificates, anything that the manufacturer or any equipment that the manufacturer deemed necessary to be on board or operating on the aircraft, make sure those are complied with. And safety of flight. So you as the PIC have the final authority, right? You go down this flow, 91.2.13, and you deem that maybe it's still not safe to fly, or maybe you deem it is safe to fly. The PIC has the full final authority on whether or not the plane is safe to fly, as long as they've gone through 91.2.13 and that flow. Moving on, we have the V in PAVE, which is going to stand for environmental factors, right? This is going to be a 91.103 and NW craft. So you as the pilot need to make sure that you're up to date with all NOTAMs, weather, known ATC delays, runway lengths, alternate fuel, and takeoff and landing distances. Now, fuel is going to change if it's VFR day, VFR night, or IFR. Alternates can also change too with specific IFR regulations or SOPs, things of that sort. Wrapping up with PAVE, we have external pressures. So biggest one you'll hear is get there itis, right? You may have a customer that wants to get from point A to point B, and there's bad weather in the way. And obviously the passenger may or may not understand the severity of that weather, and they're going to push you to do that flight. And you as the PIC need to exercise great ADM and make sure that you've exhausted all of your resources to ensure the safety of flight. And if you need to postpone it or cancel it, that you're doing that. That's a big one. There's countless and endless amount of different types of external pressures. You just have to be able, as a pilot, need to make sure that you're taking into account everything with a clear mind and prioritizing safety of flight. Moving on with CARE. CARE is going to stand for consequence, alternative, reality, and external pressures. So we'll use an example, right? You got hired to fly a customer from point A to point B, and there's bad weather in the way, right? So what's the consequence of you taking this flight? Well, you'll be flying into bad weather, right? You could potentially crash. Alternative. So what are your alternatives? Can you postpone the flight? Can you delay the flight? Can you go around that bad weather, things of that sort? And then we have reality, right? We want to make sure our alternatives are realistic, right? You can't just teleport from point A to point B. However, like I said, you can postpone a flight, you can fly around bad weather, things of that sort. You're making sure that your alternatives are realistic and safe. Lastly, we have external pressures again, right? Customer really wants to get there. Maybe they have a wedding, maybe, they have a job or a meeting that they need to get to. So they're really going to push you to do the flight. But you want to make sure that you can safely get there to your destination. So you need to take into account the external pressures and consciously ensure that whatever steps you take to get there, whether it be that day, the next day, on time, not on time, things of that sort, that you're safe and also legal. Lastly, in the 3P process, we have team, transfer, eliminate, accept, and mitigate. So can this flight, right, say same scenario, you have a customer, they're trying to get to their destination, right, and you have bad weather. Can you transfer this flight to another pilot or another plane that can fly through that bad weather, right? Eliminate. Can you eliminate the hazard? Which would, again, be delaying the flight to a later time so that you get better weather. And then you have, if you can't eliminate it and you can't transfer it, all right, now we're moving on to accept. Can you accept the risk of the hazard, right? Can your plane fly through this bad weather? Do you have enough fuel or enough time to fly around this bad weather, right? How do you accept the risk of the potential hazards, right? And if you can accept those risks, how do you mitigate it, right? So, like I said, you can either postpone the flight or you can fly around that bad weather. Anything that you can to mitigate the risk of the hazard, that's how you get through team. Moving on, we have the 5P process. This is another process you can use on the ground, but you can also use it in the air. I like to use the shooting an instrument approach as the 5P process, right? So what's the plan? All right, we're going to shoot the ILS into this airport. Cool. Plane. Did we do our before landing checklist? Did we do our descent checklist? Is the plane configured? Are we lined up on our glide slope and localizer? Pilot. All right. Did the pilots brief the approach plate? Are they knowledgeable on the missed approach procedures, when the final approach fix, or where the final approach fix is, things of that sort. Passengers, right? Brief the passengers. Seatbelts fasten and prepare for landing. Programming. Make sure that the aircraft is programmed. So double checking to make sure you have the correct approach programmed into the plane. Make sure that your flight director is programmed. Make sure that your minimums are bugged, your altitude, your headings, things of that sort. Lastly, we have the decide model. So I like to use Sully's incident where he has the bird strike. So this is a checklist and flow that you can go through in the plane. So detect a change, right? So they had a bird strike, all right? They detected a change, right? And they had engine loss, okay? Estimate a need to encounter, right? Well, they realized they couldn't continue flying. They needed to land the plane. They're estimating a need to counter. Choose a desired outcome. All right, so you always want to land the plane safely, right? So that was the outcome, land the plane safely. Identify a solution, right? ATC telling them, you can turn back, land at LaGuardia, probably can't make it back to JFK, right? Well, Sully realized that he couldn't make it back to LaGuardia, so he landed in the Hudson. And then do action, Sully landed in the Hudson. And lastly, evaluate effects, right? So during his trial, they evaluated using simulators to see did they have enough time to make it back to LaGuardia. And they realized that based on the scenario and the time that it took, human time, to realize what was happening and what were the best options, they realized that, Sully did make a good decision and he still safely landed the plane. So that's my part 2 of the ADM series, and hope this helps. And I will leave Steve Buckenrot's ADM video in the description. I think he does a fantastic job going over ADM, 3P, 5P process. So if you want to take a look at that, you can. Hope everyone has a great day. Take care.